Hi, everybody!
While the title may seem like clickbait, this is actually something I've had on my mind for a little while. I think Wolverine has a good chance of being the first game from Insomniac to be an outright failure. I don't say this lightly, as I am a hardcore Insomniac Games fan. So, why do I feel like Wolverine might end up being an abject failure? This partially stems from the fact Spider-Man 2 was such a divisive game among fans of not just Insomniac Games, but also fans of Spider-Man and fans of comic book characters as a whole. I personally think the issues are vastly overblown, but they also can't be ignored. While nowhere near as damaging to the brand like the shitstorm that was The Last of Us Part 2 was for Naughty Dog, it has taken the shine off Insomniac just a little bit. This is going to make consumers hesitant to invest in future games. Whether this is deserving or not is entirely up to you. But gamers are a little bit less likely to just blindly trust Insomniac going forward. This isn't the first time gamers will have sent a clear message with their wallets when it comes to Insomniac. They saw a decrease in sales for Ratchet & Clank titles during the late stages of the PlayStation 3 era, as those games got far more experimental and had smaller budgets to boot, with a lot of people feeling like Ratchet & Clank as a franchise had been played out after being around for over a decade. The sales for Resistance 3 also saw a massive downturn. Now in the case of Resistance, this was mostly down to it competing head-to-head with Uncharted 3, while also facing stiff competition from the bevy of other games that came out around the same time. Since 2011 was a deep year for games, a lot of titles ended up selling worse than they otherwise should have, since players' budgets were stretched thin at the time. Which brings us to the releases Insomniac put out between EA Games and Xbox. First up, we have 2013's Fuse. When you consider the 8th gen systems were just around the corner, gamers were likely less interested in trying out new IPs for systems that were on their way out. Couple that with Fuse just not being all that good, merely being a competently made shooter in an era where that's all publishers were force-feeding gamers, and it's clear why it underperformed. Sunset Overdrive, on the other hand, is a rather interesting case, since Insomniac took a gamble, and one that certainly influenced the design choices made for the first Spider-Man game. The gamble didn't exactly pay off, since Insomniac didn't exactly make a profit from the deal, whereas Microsoft did, which is surprising when you consider Sunset Overdrive was a launch window title for the Xbox One, a console that didn't exactly have too many bangers over its lifetime. Basically, whenever it rains, it truly pours for Insomniac, so it wouldn't surprise me if the backlash from Spider-Man 2 sees them through yet another rainy period. We'll just have to wait and see if they can weather this storm as well as they have previously. In the past, they had the shoulders of founder Ted Price to lean on. However, since he has recently retired, it's truly a new era for Insomniac, and it's one that could be dark for the foreseeable future, since there are some aspects that are just going to be out of their control. I have touched on this in a rather old video of mine where I discussed the fact Insomniac needs to focus on other projects after Wolverine drops. My main concern at that point in time was down to superhero fatigue setting in. Since I made that video, things have just gotten worse, and not better. This is mostly down to the Marvel Cinematic Universe putting out some rather crappy films and being rather directionless. But even if they had kept the quality consistent in the MCU, I don't think the box office numbers were going to be all that rosy. When you consider the current crop of films tops out where the low end used to be, and it's clear people are just a little bit burnt out on superhero films, maybe even superheroes as a whole, since comic sales have been fluctuating for a while now, and even gamers have said they're a bit bored of Batman games and other titles. Though I will admit, Superman from this year did perform well, so it might just be a case of Marvel properties underperforming. We'll just have to wait and see in that regard, as the DC Cinematic Universe is literally in its infancy after being rebooted from the DC Extended Universe, which went out with a whimper not all that long ago. Basically, what I'm getting at is it will be really hard to tell if Wolverine will perform well, given the factors surrounding it outside of Insomniac's control. There's also the fact an industry-wide crash is likely, which is certainly outside of their control, as it's all up to consumers whether it happens or not. But the seeds for one were planted a long time ago. It's just in the last handful of years, those seeds have started to grow and bloom. A lot of studios are going to be caught off guard when that bubble does finally burst. Insomniac should be cushioned a little bit, considering they're owned by PlayStation outright, but a lot of other studios won't be so lucky. So, what do I see happening? I want to be wrong here, but I think we're going to see Wolverine vastly underperform, to the point Insomniac goes through some significant restructuring, which could honestly be a good thing for them at this stage. Insomniac is always at their best when they have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. Just look at how they were during the PS1 through PS3 era. They had an almost yearly release. They were also full of young talent who had either a few years in the industry or were freshly out of college. At this point, they're full of industry veterans, most of them probably being rather jaded at this stage. This is the type of thing you tend to see when a studio has been at or near the top for a very long time. I actually feel like all of the PlayStation studios likely would be in better places if they focus more on younger talent and letting them compete with each other. Back in the day, Insomniac competed heavily with Naughty Dog, and they had something of an older and younger sibling dynamic, though they would help each other get their games over the finish line during the PS1 through 3 eras of systems. Of all the PlayStation studios, those two are the ones that need to clean house the most. I covered why for Naughty Dog in a previous video, so that should be appearing on screen now as a card. Even if Wolverine ends up being as great a game as it deserves to be, there's still the problem of 2026 being possibly one of the most loaded years in terms of game releases. This has led many to speculate we won't see Wolverine until 2027. I don't think that is too likely, given PlayStation really doesn't have a game for late next year to compete for holiday sales. Sure, that slot could be taken up by Marvel Tokon Fighting Souls, but that seems more like an early in the year type of release to me, given how heavily Sony have been pushing it marketing-wise. Couple that with fighting games not having quite the same appeal as a more generic superhero game, and you start to see that a holiday release for Wolverine is the likeliest scenario. But like I said, next year is packed for releases, meaning the sales for a lot of games are going to mirror those in 2011. The initial sales figures aren't going to look great as consumers' wallets will be stretched thin, which is going to have a knock-on effect into 2027, as the sales for games released that year are going to potentially be slowed thanks to gamers picking up games they missed from the previous year. Also, if Insomniac does release Wolverine after 2026, that puts them in potentially murky waters, since that's when Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet will be coming out, again potentially mirroring the fates of Uncharted and Resistance 3. This also could potentially put us in the window for the 10th generation of consoles. I don't personally think that'll be the case though, as the 9th generation had such a troubled start, and prices for the consoles are now going up instead of down, thanks to world events, and it just seems like a really bad time to release a brand new system when the current crop of consoles really hasn't had enough games to justify them. But when you consider the hardcore gamer is likely to be penny pinching when they suspect a new generation of consoles is upcoming, it becomes harder to justify spending on a big budget game at full price. Though the last year of a console's life does tend to be its most productive when it comes to large releases. Look no further than 2013 and 2020 for the PS3 and 4 respectively, as those consoles had some of their best experiences release in that time frame. But 2026 makes the most sense for Wolverine to release, especially when you consider it was announced in September of 2021. Meaning we will have been waiting for the game a total of 5 years by the time next year rolls around. The average development time for a AAA project is 3 to 5 years. So, clearly, Wolverine was announced way too soon, or they had actually intended to release it sometime this year, and it just didn't happen for whatever reason. So, when can we expect Wolverine to actually go gold and hit store shelves? I think it's likely we see the game sometime in the summer to early holiday season windows. It's just after Grand Theft Auto 6 launches in late May, but also gives it enough breathing room to miss the other big releases, potentially protecting it from being an abject failure when it comes to sales. Basically, I'm not all that optimistic when it comes to the future of Marvel's Wolverine, even if I want to be wrong about this. If I end up being wrong, I'll be happy about that. But, my pessimism aside, are you concerned for Wolverine? Why or why not? Let me know in the comments. If you liked this video, then check out my video on why Insomniac needs to take a break from Marvel games after Wolverine. And until next time, keep blazing that trail.